Now stop me if you've heard this one. A finance department has an opening, there are 50 applicants. Question number 3 on the application goes somewhere along the lines, do you know Excel? And you get 50 answers saying, of course I do, doesn't everyone? My name is Gašper Kamenšek, I'm a Microsoft MVP for Excel, and this is my version of an Excel skills test for a job interview. The questions are designed to have multiple layers or multiple answers. It's important to note, none of the questions are set up in a way where they have only one correct answer. I think that would be totally counterproductive, and no Excel test should look like that. Because in a way, you're not only trying to test if somebody, has done it before and therefore knows the answer right out of the box. Maybe even more so, you're trying to test if someone can connect the dots on the spot and give you a correct answer and, that beautiful mind kind of moment. Okay, so I'm going to give you a rundown of the 5 questions, letting you know why these 5 questions are important, also what purpose they serve, and also I'll give you ideas of a build-up. So if somebody hits a home run in the first try and gives you the answer in 5 seconds, so that you can say, okay, now what can you do with that? Can you do this? Okay, let's start with question number 1, or rather task number 1. Now I love this one. The task is very simple. It just says, can you please input today's date in a range of cells from A3 to A100,000. So as far as the instructions go, it's very simple. And I think it's very important that the first task is not something like create a data model where you simulate a many-to-many relationship and everyone just goes like, oh, it's important that the first task is easy to understand. And this one is. It only includes 2 concepts, today's date and a range of cells in Excel. Now, if somebody doesn't know those concepts, then they don't know Excel, period. But if they do, it's very easy to understand what is required of them, and yet it's not that easy to solve. So let me show you how this is done if you know one concept, and that concept to me is very important in Excel, and that is Control-Enter. If you know Control-Enter in Excel. If you don't know Control-Enter, check out the video above somewhere. It's basic Excel. It's basic Excel, and yet many people don't know it. But why I would want someone working for me, why I would want to know if they know Control-Enter, is because I know that they save up about 20 minutes a day next to the guy that doesn't know Control-Enter. That's why it's important. And now let me show you how this can be done with Control-Enter, and then, as I said, it can be done multiple ways. Each of these tasks have multiple answers or multiple solutions, and then I'll show you what the other solutions could be, and then I'll even show you how to upgrade on the answer if it is exactly what it should be. Okay, let's go. Okay, here's the solution I would be most glad to see. It would simply be, okay, I'll select the name box, I'll go A3, colon, A100,000, enter. Now I have my selection, and from here on, I'll just do this. I'll go Control and semicolon and Control-Enter. And that is it. That is today's date and that range of cells. I would also be very glad if the candidate would have asked, should the date always be today's date, or would it have to be dynamic so that it would change every day? Right? Should I use the today function, or should I use this? Regardless, if somebody did this, I would be extremely happy. But not many people would. And then people need to get creative. And to be creative in Excel, the problem here is not today's date as much as is in all these cells. That's the problem. And if I would have had a way to copy somewhere exactly to A100,000, then that would kind of be exactly where I, would want to be. Even if I have no concept of Control Enter, of the name box and all that, if I could just get that range somehow, and a clever way of doing it would be, I'll put 3 in here, and that will not format itself the way it should, but I really don't care. I'll just put 3 in there. I'll put it in general like this. And then you go home, fill, series. And you say, in this column, I want you to create a linear series. Step is 1 and stop at 100,000. Go OK. And all of a sudden, you have exactly what you need. You have those 99,997 cells full. Now all you need to do is you need to somehow input today's date into the first 2 and then just select both cells and double click. And what you got is you got your 99,997 today's dates, right? And it kind of takes the basic concepts of Excel, building on them, connecting a few, and creating a very creative solution to this problem. Now, there could be a lot more ways of doing this, but apart from, the two that work on filling multiple cells at the same time. So one could easily go like this, just inputting the first date and then doing this, right? But I'm guessing we're all in agreement this could never lead to eternal happiness, or let's put it another way, this is not what we're looking for, right? Because before this gets to 100,000, the day is over, and the test is over. And this is what we're looking for. We're looking for people who, they can try like this, and then in the end, even if they got to 100,000, it's still a catastrophe because they get the series and then they need to copy cells and all that. So this very simple task is a perfect start because it's easy to understand, and yet to solve it, you need to have some complex or not so complex concepts by themselves, but brought together in a complex way. And I'm going to give you another tip here, which is the build-up, right? So if someone was to do exactly as I showed you, so I'll just go A3, colon, A100,000, enter, control and semicolon, control enter, I have the date, now what, right? 2 seconds, solution is here. Then you go, okay, now could you make those days dynamic? That is a good build-up because you're trying to see if they know their functions, if they know today. And then you go, oh, you can make it dynamic. Okay, could you make it so that we have not just the current date, but also the current time? So if they know the now function. And you can really build on that, right? And one of my perfect ways, if somebody does this brilliantly, because it's such a short task if you know Control Enter, is cool. Now, could you go to the column C and starting with the same date, could you give me a list of all weekdays, so no weekends, no Saturdays, no Sundays, just all the dates occurring on weekdays down to the end of 2021. So what we would be looking for is, starting with this, fill series. I want to create a date series in a column. I only want the weekdays, so no Saturdays, no Sundays. And I want to stop at December 31st, 2021. Right? And this is such a good build-up because it actually comes full circle to the other solution, right? In the other solution, if they don't know Control Enter, they actually needed to show us that they know fill series command. Whereas here we say, oh, you know Control Enter, now show me that you know the fill series command, and even that not just in a sense of create a series from 1 to 100,000, but create a much more complex date series, right? So that is a perfect buildup of this task. Now let's move on to task number 2. Okay, task number 2. Now this one is set up in a way where it kind of checks if there's a scientist on the other side, right? If there is someone that is trying to understand the data, and also how well they can read Excel formulas and functions. Now, this data set is very stripped down just so I can quickly show you the basis of the example. But I want you to imagine this, the same one column, but having about 10,000 or 20,000 rows, right? So there would be 20,000 of these values. But two things would be the same. There would be a function in the end, the average function, and it would return an error, which means somewhere in those 20,000 cells there is an error. And there would be only one, but it would be so well hidden because, you know, it's among other values and among 20,000 values. And another thing to note here is if I would do a count, I would see that there are 11 values right now. But then if I go count numbers, I would see that there are only 8 numbers within the range. Now one of them, right, the non-number is an error, but that still leaves 2 values in here that are not numbers. And it's this eye to detail that I would be looking at. So if somebody would figure out, okay, there are things here that are, you know, not as they appear, that would be what I would have in mind when giving someone this task. And a solution would be fairly simple. Now, basically, looking at this function at the end already tells you, okay, I have an error somewhere. Now you have 2 options how to deal with that. You can either go to the filter and simply find the error and say, this is what I'm looking for. And it's going to show you the error. It's going to show you which row the error is in, and you can correct that. A perfect question would be, do you want me to fix the function at the end so that if there's an error, it doesn't return anything? Or would you want me to just fix the error itself? Now, the perfect question of the applicant would be, do you want me to take the subtotal function and replace it with the aggregate function? Why? Well, because the aggregate function does something very well. It says, I'll calculate an average, and then in the options tab, you can say ignore errors, which the subtotal function obviously does not, and the sum function, the average functions, they do not, but the aggregate function does. So if somebody asked me that, given this assignment, I would be very, very happy with that. And another way someone could get creative here is by using the go to special command, by saying, okay, so this is a range of values, and at this point it doesn't even matter that if there's 20,000 of them or just the 11 that you see here. The procedure would be just the same. So go to special and then you go, so give me those things that are returning errors. Now those can be formulas or they can be constants. You can search for both. I'll go with formulas. I'll say okay, and there it is. I just found it. Right? If there were 20,000 of them, I've just found it. And very similarly, I would go about finding my text. So I would go to special. I need those constants that are text. Oh, it's these two, right? And it's because they were written in a way where you started with an apostrophe, and that was the input. So this is text to Excel. And a buildup of this would be a very cool question of, now how would you go about changing all of those text values to numbers, but still doing that in the same cells? So not creating a new column with value function or anything like that. And if that's the only way you know how, then do that. But what I would be going for is copying a blank cell, selecting these, and simply going paste special. I want you to do an operation. I want you to add this cell to these. Now, this cell is a blank cell, so it holds a value of 0. And all I'm doing here is I'm saying plus 0 to each one of these. A plus 0 does nothing in a sense of making the number larger or smaller, but it tells Excel a critical thing. It tells, well, I want to calculate with these items. And that's why those two just became numbers. And I can show you that very easily by saying count, it's still 11, and count numbers is now 10. Why? Well, because of this error. That one is still not a number, but those two text values just became a number. And this is a perfect build-up that I would use to see if somebody can, think on a spot and use Excel in a very creative way. Okay, moving on to number 3. Okay, question number 3 or task number 3 is very similar to task number 1 in a sense that it's very easy to understand or explain what I'm asking. So there are 40 values here. Just give me a sum of top 10 values. That's it. I need the sum of top 10 values from this range. Now, whereas it's easy to understand, the way you're going to solve it is designed to show me if you can go kind of beyond just the regular 7 functions that everyone knows in Excel, right? Beyond the sum, average, min, max, and count, and let's just throw in SUMIF and VLOOKUP. Beyond that basket that everyone knows. So there's a whole plethora of functions beyond that. And this one would actually require you to know a function called large. Now there's a function called large in Excel where you say this is the range and I want you to give me the 7th largest value from that range. Right? A simple function, basically a very simple function. And on the opposite side you got the small function, but it needs to be used here. The correct, and I know I said there's no correct, only one correct answer, but the most correct answer to this would be somewhere along the lines of this. So if somebody would have done this, would have gone, give me 1 to 10. Over here, give me equals large of this array, and I want this value, and I'm gonna make that absolute, this. So this is the top 10 values, and then all I have to do down here is just say give me the sum of those values. So this is the sum of top 10 values from this range, right? Not that difficult. And this, so what I've done here is actually probably solution number 3 in a sense of how quick this can be, because this would be much easier if I just used row 1 to 10, or even better if I would have used a function called sequence. Give me 10, that's it. Now this one says it can't spill because there are values in here, but if they're not, you see it does the same thing. And then this could be really, really cool, because I could just say, do it in a sense of a dynamic array. There you go. And now I have the solution. But even this could be simplified by just writing one simple function. So going equals sum of a large function. This is the array, and I want you to use the sequence function on this array. There it is. So like this and like this. And that is it. That is the sum of top 10 values in that range. Now, if somebody would have done this, you know, kudos to you. But then again, you know, that was deep into the formula land. On the other hand, someone could have simply gone, okay, so top 10 values, I could just highlight the top 10 values like this. And now all I need to do is select the top 10 values one way or the other. And here it is. So the answer is 256,291. And since I didn't say, give me the sum of top 10 values in this cell, that is also a correct answer, right? Remember when I said there is no just one correct way to do it? Just get to the answer, right? So there are other ways that this could be achieved, but of course, I would much prefer to see someone using the large function over here. If somebody would have done that, then the buildup of this would have been, do you know the small function? And maybe I would even go as far as to say, what would the sum of top 10 values be if I would have rounded up all those numbers to the closest multiple of 100, right? So checking if somebody has heard of ceiling, floor, mround, really digging deep into the function basket of Excel and seeing, you know, how much of that is in the applicant's head. Okay, that's question number 3. Now let's move on to number 4. Number 4 is very much in keeping with this day and age. The abundance of data, the need to analyze that data, the need to grab that data and get it into Excel, it's all kind of combined into task number 4. Now, basically, what I would be hoping for here and what I would be checking for here is Power Query. Power Query is, to me, hands down, one of the greatest things, if not the greatest thing that happened in Excel in the last 10 years. Having said that, it's almost been 10 years, right? It's 2021 and Power Query came out in 2013. So checking for this also tells me how much a person sitting opposite to me is keeping up, you know, and not just keeping up, how much they're brushing on the latest and greatest and how much they're incorporating that into their workflow. And I find that extremely important in an applicant. Just the sheer willingness to learn. I think that's extremely important, and this checks for that. And it checks in a way that I give them 4 TXT files. Now these TXT files, they have sort of multiple layers to them. They look like this. So the layers within this are, there are days that are not US format, so people need to deal with that. And I specifically designed these in a way where the number of blank rows above the desired data set varies from file to file. So this is the next one, and you can see this one only has 3 blank rows. And this is one more, this one only has 1, whereas the original one, the first one, had multiple blank rows above the data set. Combining these requires effort. Now, there's a trick here in the way this is spelled out. It says join 4 TXT files, but expect that more are on the way. Right? So kind of copy pasting the TXT files content into Excel and then manually deleting the top rows and pasting them below just doesn't cut it. Okay, so what I would want to see here is I would want someone to take initiative and say, okay, so we're gonna get all the files from this folder, and then if we get extra files, we'll just add them to the folder. And we'll set up a master table that comes from all of these in a way that it just includes the new files on the fly, right? And we do that with Power Query. So the way we do that is say data, get data from file, and in this case from folder. So we're going to say from folder. Now I'll recopy the folder path because otherwise it would be very, very tedious to get to. And what I'm going to say is these are the files. Now I wanted to combine them. Now if I just combine them, I would not be a good choice given that there are rows at the top that I don't need, and there are certain columns that I should take a look at and maybe somehow tell Power Query how to deal with them. So what I'm going to say is combine and transform. So combine and transform data, and what this will give me is it will give me which is my sample file. Now usually what you would go for is you would go for the last one, right? Because the last file is the closest to what you need in the end. But I wouldn't, judge if an applicant picked just the first file the way it was given. I wouldn't judge by this. What I would judge by is if they're even opening Power Query, if they're even aware of Power Query's existence. And then in Power Query, if I would see things like, okay, so now we need a step, let's call it base, and then let's deal with the variable of blank rows at the top. And how we're going to deal with that is we're going to add a column. We're going to call this column the index column from 1, and what I'll do is I'll bring this one to the start just because it's easier, so to beginning, and then I'm going to filter on the first column all the way to the ID. Why? Well, because that's where my data starts. That is the header of my table, and this is what I need. The ID of this is exactly what I need. It might as well be called index, and now I'll go create a blank step, go back to source, and remove top rows. How many? Well, I'll just ballpark it here. I'll say 8. Why? Because this hard-coded number does me no good. What I need is whatever I've saved up here in the index step. That's how many rows I need you to pull down. And with that, I actually removed the header row, which is not a good idea. So I'll go -1. And once I have this, now I'll say use first row as headers, right? Because I know I'm over there. I'm gonna ignore the change type step. And over here with the dates, you can see that the dates are written in a, well, I'm gonna say normal way, day, month, year, but not the way the US does them. So what I need to do here is I need to say change the type using locale. And the locale that I'm gonna use will be, this is a date, but the way, and I'm just gonna go with Slovenia because that's the way we write dates. And you could have gone with any other country that does them like that, but so this is now, because it turned them into the US dates, so this is now January 1st, 2016, but they work, they are dates, they're legit dates. And once I have this, I could have gone through the other ones, but I will not do that. I now look at the end query, which I'm going to rename into master table. And all I need to do is remove the last step, and this is it. So these are all 4 files combined. So this is the data from all 4 files, treated in the same way that I taught Power Query here. And that is something I would expect for an applicant to do. Maybe not so much expect as hope for. And if somebody did it like this and says close and load over here, and just kind of load it. Okay, so now we have it loaded on a new sheet. Let's load it exactly where it should be. So I'm gonna delete the sheet that it created for me. I'm gonna go on question 4. I'm gonna say load to a table, existing worksheet, start here, and OK. And this is exactly what is required of this question. Would I expect, or let me put it differently, the percentage of applicants that I would expect to do exactly what I showed you now is fairly small, fairly small. I would expect someone to shoot up VBA. I would expect someone to use the legacy connectors to TXT files, which wouldn't help any, because they would still need to connect to all 4 and then manually remove the rows and all that and then put them together. But that connector actually has the date format. You can specify the date format within. So that would also be a legitimate way of doing this, but I would be going for this. And again, not just in a sense of can he do exactly this, but does he keep up with, or she, of course, does the applicant keep up with the latest and greatest? That's the goal I have in mind with this question. And the build-up potential of this is endless, simply endless. You can build this up in so many ways. You can do a calculation of an extra column. You can do amazing stuff with this. You can go for a pivot table out of this where you would say, I want you to add up time, and you would see if they actually know the trick of formatting a cell so it shows you time greater than 24 hours and stuff like that. You can build on this endlessly. Okay, question number 5. I hope you're all having a good laugh over the title. I had one too. But I think that's so important, and this is actually a build-up of the last question, right? The last one was going for do they know Power Query? Well, this one goes a bit further than that, because you can solve this with 3 simple formulas. 3 simple formulas. That's all you need to solve all this. And let me tell you what is required here. So from the table that we got as a result of combining those TXT files, what I want here is give me a list of unique planes. So give me a list of all unique items in column plane, and then give me a data validation drop-down list that lets me choose any of these planes. And from that, when I choose a plane, what I want over here is a subset of my original data filtered to exactly this plane that I chose over there. Now, the reason I love this is because it's one of those that has multiple solutions, multiple ways of doing it. And I'm sort of gonna go through the, let's call it time. Go through time in Excel and tell you how I would solve this. So a list of unique planes, well, I could do that with a pivot table. I would create a pivot table off of this. So let's just do that. Let's create a pivot table like this. And if I put in plane, what do I get? Well, this is the list of all unique planes, right? Simple. But this solution is so, 2003. And the worst thing about it is, if I go about it like this, there's no way to get only that data in here, or at least no easy way. There are ways, but no, not good ways. And then I'm also going to have issues. If this is a pivot table, I'm going to have issues with creating a data validation that is dynamic. Well, reason number one, pivot tables are not dynamic, so you have to refresh them. But having said that, if you refresh a pivot table, how do you make this dynamic? And if you go off a pivot table, you would need to create named ranges with offset. It was the way we did it in 2003, but we have progressed since. So that would be a solution I would sort of applaud, but not really. Now, the second solution, that one would be kind of better, is simply doing it with Power Query. Because you can do all these things, well, not the data validation. Data validation will always be data validation. But you can do these two with simple Power Query. What you would say is, start with this table, so data, start from this table, and once I have the table in Power Query, what I would say is I only need the plane column, remove other columns, and then in this one, remove all duplicates. And then if I wanted to, let's sort it ascending, and I get this. I would consider this a superior solution to the pivot table one, simply for the obvious reason that this means you're 10 years ahead, at least, of the person using the pivot table solution. But if you think about it, what I said before was, if I use the pivot table solution, I'm still gonna need to refresh it, and Power Query just the same. If my data changes, I still need to hit refresh and do it that way. But now, the way this should be done is by simply using the incredible new formulas from dynamic arrays. So what I would say is, give me a unique values from this column of this table. And that's it. Okay, and now I have my list using the dynamic arrays. Let me just point out, this is a feature of Office 365. You can't use these formulas in other Office products or in Excel 2013, 2016, and so on. You could simulate it by using the array formulas, but this is so much better than that. But now let me show you something really, really cool. I'm gonna take a picture with my camera of this, and I'm gonna paste that picture right here. There you go. And now, take a look at this. This is why this is such a brilliant thing. If I add a new, so let's add the giant bird, so it's 380, I think. Did you see? It works without any refreshes. It just adds that item to the list. Why? Because it's a formula. It's the formula engine of Excel that does this. And it gets refreshed every time you enter something or refresh the entire workbook. And now for the data validation list, if this was either a table derived from Power Query or a pivot table, Creating this list would require you to create a named range. Well, if it was a table derived from Power Query, you could actually, if you did it correctly, you could just select the column and it would work. It would be dynamic. But now that I have the formulas, now I can just go data validation. This should be a list, and this list should be defined by this cell and everything that cell defines. This is a new syntax in Excel, and it means everything that this cell defines, and it's all these items, and you can see that right here. Right? So now I have a list of this, and it's dynamic. It's dynamic because it shoots off this formula, which will refresh immediately something changes in my data. And if I've done this, and if I now select a single plane right here, now I can do this. Now I can go equals filter. And what I want you to do is to take the entire table, so the master table, and the filter you should apply is where a plane column equals whatever I've chosen right here. Right? Enter, and that is it. And a single formula that does everything I need. Right? And if I now choose the 380, that's the row that I changed just before. And if you haven't seen dynamic arrays ever, this should be the greatest thing you've ever seen. Probably today, this week, this month, maybe this year. And I would so be searching for that in an applicant. I'm, again, not claiming I would expect someone to do it like this, but if someone did, I would just say sign here. And I think that's the point of having questions that allow the wiggle room, where you can still solve it the way you would in 2003, you can solve it the way you would in 2013, but then you can solve it the way you would in 2021. And if somebody does that, it gives you all the information that you need about that person, at least as far as Excel is concerned, and their knowledge of Excel. Okay, this was a long one. If you have extra ideas for what to include, leave them down in the comments below. If you want the files that I used for this, if you think you could use them, or if you want to go through the process that I went through, just leave a comment below and I'll send them to you. And thanks for watching. This was a long one. Thanks for sticking around, and I'll see you on the next one.